Hey y'all. All right, well, I am back, and today we are going to be reading chapter 25 of Tuck Everlasting. This is technically the last chapter of the book, but there is an epilogue, and I will be reading the epilogue, but you're going to have to wait until tomorrow for that one. So I am going to go on to chapter 25. Just as a quick recap, in chapter 24, a storm rolled into Tree Gap. During the storm, Miles was able to pull all the nails out of the window that held the bars right outside of May's jail cell. He took all the nails out. He pulled the window out. May came out as planned. When he went in, she then put herself on the cot and laid on the cot for a minute, but was curious to know what was going to happen with the Tucks. So right at the end, she pulled herself up by the bars on the window to look out. Because remember, she's only 10, so she's probably not tall enough to actually stand on the bed and just be able to look out the window if the window's a little bit higher. She looks out the window, and the Tucks are gone. She doesn't see Miles or Jesse, Tuck or May, but she swears that she hears the tinkling little melody of the music box kind of fading away as they were leaving. So that's where we're left. So chapter 25, hopefully we find out what happens to Winnie and what happens with the constable, and we'll see if anything happens with the Tucks, if they come back into the picture or what happens here. All right, so let's go. Page 127, chapter 25, page 127. Pause the video if you do not have your book right now. Make sure you have your book with you so you can follow along with me. Remember, I want your eyes tracking the words across the page as I'm reading. Pause it, get your book, come back, be ready. If you have your book and you're ready to go, then let's do it. All right, here we go. The first week of August was long over. And now, though autumn was still some weeks away, there was a feeling that the year had begun its downward arc, that the wheel was turning again, slowly now, but soon to go faster, turning once more in its changeless sweep of change. Winnie, standing at the fence in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, could hear the new note in the voices of the birds. Whole clouds of them lifted, chattering into the sky above the wood, and then settled, only to lift again. Across the road, goldenrod was coming into bloom, and an early drying milkweed had opened its rough pod, exposing a host of downy-headed seeds. As she watched, one of these detached itself into a sudden breeze and sailed sedately off, while others leaned from the pod as if to observe its departure. So this first paragraph on page 127 is really another way that Natalie Babbitt is using the words to describe this setting. So the setting has changed. Winnie is back home. She's sitting in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage. She's at the fence, and she's looking out around her. She sees goldenrod, which is a type of flower, across the road. She also sees milkweed, which is kind of it's another type of plant, but milkweed has a pod, and when the pod opens, these fluffy little things kind of float through the air. So if you can picture a dandelion in July or August, when dandelions have those little white wishy things all over them, and when you blow on the dandelion or when the wind blows hard, those little white things go floating out through the air. That's kind of what milkweed does. Same idea. And she's using the reference again of the wheel turning. So this time the wheel is not necessarily representing life going on. It's representing a season change. So they're just a few weeks away from fall. They're kind of toward the end of summer. So now instead of our wheel representing the change of life, it's representing the change in seasons, which also ends up being kind of a change in life too. All right, page 128. Winnie dropped down cross-legged on the grass. 2 weeks had gone by since the night of the storm, the night of May Tuck's escape, and May had not been found. There was no trace of her at all, or of Tuck, or Miles, or Jesse. Winnie was profoundly grateful for that, but she was also profoundly tired. It had been a trying 2 weeks. For the 100th time, she reviewed it all. how the constable had come into the cell soon after she had settled herself on the cot, how he had let down a shutter over the window to keep out the rain, how then he stood over her as she hunched under the blanket, her breath heavy, trying to look as large as possible, how finally he had gone away and not come back till morning. So he actually came. So 2 weeks ago, she was in that jail cell. She's on the cot. She's trying to make herself be all big. The constable comes in to close the shutter over the window, to close the window so that the rain wouldn't come in. But he didn't look under the blanket to see who was there. He just assumed that it was May. And he ended up leaving the jail cell and not coming back until morning. So did Winnie's plan work? Yes, it did. Yep. For the 100th, next paragraph. This is third paragraph on page 128. But she had not dared to sleep for fear she would kick off the blanket and give herself away, give the tucks away unwittingly. So she had lain there, pulse thudding, eyes wide open. She would never forget the rattle of the rain on the jailhouse roof, or the smell of wet wood, or the darkness that had saved them all, or how difficult it was not to cough. She had wanted to cough as soon as it occurred to her that she mustn't, and she passed a long hour trying to swallow away the tickle that perversely constricted her throat. And she would never forget the crash outside that made her heart race, that she could not investigate and did not until morning. When on the way home, she saw that the gallows had blown over in the wind. So that night that she's in the jail cell as May, she hears this crash outside, but she can't get up to see what it is because the constable might notice that she's up and that it's not May on the cot. So she has to wait until morning to figure it out. And while she's on her way home, so what happens to her between the time that she wakes up to the time she goes home, hopefully we'll find out. But while she's on her way home, she looks and she notices that the gallows had actually blown over. So May would not have been hung at those gallows anyways. But she still would have been in jail, and who knows what would have happened to her if they would have sent her to Charlieville or somewhere else. But oh, it made her tremble still to remember the constable's face when he found her. She had heard first a bustling in the front of the jail and smelled fresh coffee and had sat up, stiff with apprehension. Then the inner door opened, the door she now saw, which separated the office from the pair of cells, and in the light that streamed before him, the constable appeared carrying a breakfast tray. He was whistling cheerfully. He came up to the barred door of her cell and looked in, and his whistling died on his lips as if it had run down and needed to be wound up again. So he's whistling away, bringing breakfast to May, and he looks into the cell, and his whistling stops immediately. But this comical astonishment lasted for only a moment. And then his face flushed red with anger. Winnie had sat on the cot, eyes downcast, feeling very small and very like a criminal. In fact, he was soon shouting that if she were older, he'd have to keep her there, that it was a crime, what she had done. She was an accomplice. Ooh, see, that was the word that I told you about earlier. An accomplice is somebody who works with a criminal to do something. So, I think we had even talked about at one point, like driving the getaway car. If somebody went in to rob the bank, you didn't actually rob the bank, but you were the one driving the car, you would be considered an accomplice, and that would be a crime. So here's 10-year-old Winnie, who helped the Tucks escape from jail, or helped May Tuck escape from jail, and helped the Tucks escape, get her out. So she becomes an accomplice in all this. She had helped a murderer escape. She was, in fact, a criminal, but too young to be punished by law. Worse luck, he told her, for she badly needed punishing. So he's mad. He's mad about the whole thing. She was released then into the custody of her mother and father, and these new words, accomplice and custody, chilled her blood. Over and over they asked her, shocked at first and then wistful, why had she done such a thing? So her parents wanted to know why. I would want to know why too. Why? She was their daughter. They had trusted her. They had tried to bring her up properly with a true sense of right and wrong. They did not understand. And finally, she had sobbed the only truth there was into her mother's shoulder, the only explanation. The Tucks were her friends. She had done it because, in spite of everything, she loved them. This, of all things, her family understood, and afterward they drew together staunchly around her. It was hard for them in the village. Winnie knew it was, and the knowledge gave her pain, for they were proud, and she had shamed them. Still, this side of the affair was not without its benefits, at least for Winnie. Though she was confined to the yard indefinitely and could go nowhere. In other words, she was, what's the word? You get in trouble at home, parents are upset, grandma's upset, you need to be punished. You're not allowed to leave your house. You're not allowed to leave your yard. You're not allowed to hang out with your friends. You're not allowed maybe to play video games. What do you call it? Yeah, she was grounded. So she got grounded. It says, though she was confined to the yard indefinitely and could go nowhere, not even with her mother or her grandmother, the other children wandered by to look at her, to talk to her through the fence. They were impressed by what she had done. So the other kids that lived in Tree Gap, who kind of probably ignored her before or didn't even think anything about her, are now coming by to see her because they kind of just think she's cool. Like, what? You did what? Tell us about it. She was a figure of romance to them now, where before she had been too neat, too prissy, almost somehow too clean to be a real friend. So this, what she did kind of made her more human to the kids. Instead of being too perfect like the house that she lives in, she becomes more like them. Winnie sighed and plucked at the grass around her ankles. School would open soon. It wouldn't be so bad. In fact, she thought as her spirits lifted, this year it might be rather nice. And then two things happened. First of all, the toad appeared out of the weeds on her side of the road this time. It bounced out of a cover of old dandelion leaves and landed plop just beyond the fence. If she had reached her hand through the bars, she could have touched it. And next, a large brown dog with an easy gait and dangling tongue came loping down the road toward them. He stopped opposite the fence and looked at Winnie with a friendly swish of his tail, and then he saw the toad. At once he began to bark, his eyes bright. He pranced up, his hindquarters leaping independently from side to side, nose close to the toad, his voice shrill with enthusiasm. "Ah, don't!" cried Winnie, leaping to her feet and flapping her arms. "Go away, dog! Shoo! Stop that! Go away! Shoo!" The dog paused. He looked up at Winnie's frantic dancing, and then he looked at the toad who had pressed down close to the dirt, eyes tight shut. It was too much for him. He began to bark again and reached out a long paw. "Oh!" cried Winnie. "Oh, don't do that! Leave my toad alone!" And before she had time to realize what she was doing, she bent down, reached through the bars, and snatched the toad up and away from harm, dropping it on the grass inside the fence. Because imagine Winnie touching the toad. I mean, it was always nice to have a conversation with the toad, but she is a pretty clean, kind of perfectly prissy type of girl. So grabbing the toad probably wasn't something that she thought she would do herself. Why would she do that? Is this completely out of her character? I don't think so. I don't think it's completely out of her character because she saved the Tucks. And what she did just now was saved the toad from the dog. A feeling of revulsion swept through her. While the dog whined, pawing uselessly at the fence, she stood rigid, staring at the toad, wiping her hand again on her skirt, on the skirt of her dress. So she's like wiping her hand. Then she remembered the actual feel of the toad, and the revulsion passed. She knelt and touched the skin of its back. It was rough and soft both at once, and cool. Winnie stood up and looked at the dog. He was waiting outside the fence, his head on one side, peering at her longingly. "It's my toad," Winnie told him, "so you better leave it alone." And then on impulse, so without even thinking, just quickly deciding to do something, she turned and ran into the cottage, up to her room, to the bureau drawer where she had hidden Jessie's bottle. The bottle of water from the spring. In a moment, she was back again. The toad still squatted where she had dropped it. The dog still waited at the fence. Winnie pulled out the cork from the mouth of the bottle, and kneeling, she poured the precious water very slowly and carefully over the toad. The dog watched this operation, and then, yawning, he was suddenly bored. He turned and loped away, back down the road to the village. Winnie picked up the toad and held it for a long time without the least disgust in the palm of her hand. It sat calmly, blinking, and the water glistened on its back. What did Grandma Foster tell us about toads when Winnie wanted to give water to the toad on that very hot August day? Do you remember? I believe it went something like this. Toads don't need water to drink, Winnie. They don't drink water. They absorb water through their skin, which, by the way, I did look that fact up, and it is true. So if this is true, which it is, then that means the water that Winnie just poured from the spring, onto this toad would make this toad everlasting. And who is she holding on the front? Yep. Now you know the significance of the toad. Maybe. Unless the Tuck story isn't true at all, which Winnie still isn't 100% sure of. But what she did was she just gave her bottle of spring water to the toad. So now what's she going to do when she turns 17? Last paragraph, page 132. The little bottle was empty now. It lay on the grass at Winnie's feet. But if all of it was true, there was more water in the wood. There was plenty more. Just in case, when she was 17, if she should decide there was more water in the wood, Winnie smiled. Then she stooped and put her hand through the fence and set the toad free. "There," she said. "You're safe forever." And that's the end of the book. This is it. So, tomorrow, wait for me, because the epilogue is so good, and I really want to read it with you. So I hope you enjoyed Tuck Everlasting. It is truly one of my favorites. It has been for years. It still is. I'm super excited about reading the epilogue tomorrow. I hope that you guys are excited about the book and reading the epilogue as well. Here's the plan. No packet, but you'll notice that I posted the packet keys for 23 and 24 already. Make sure your packet is done completely. If we do go back to school, I'm going to want that from you. If you do not have your packet, then you should probably be writing the questions and answers on a sheet of notebook paper. I am going to be reading the epilogue tomorrow and posting the epilogue. Here's what you need to know. The test for Tuck Everlasting will be next week. I will be posting it in Google Classroom on Monday. You will have until Friday to complete it. The test is open book and open note. So you can use any part of your binder. You can use any part of your Tuck Everlasting packet, or the book or anything that we've done so far with Tuck, if you have been keeping track of everything on the Google Doc, that's the Plot Mountain Google Doc, you can even use that. All right, that's it for tonight. I hope everyone is well. Everybody is staying healthy. I miss you all. Hugs and kisses. See ya.